Hey, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. Meeting in a Moment of Life and Death. Late afternoon in Portland, rain poured down relentlessly, blurring every outline of the world outside. Lisa Carter drove her old pickup truck along the Forest Edge Road, the faint headlights piercing through the thick curtain of rain. The windshield wipers screeched rhythmically, blending with the sound of rain hammering the glass, forming a chaotic symphony. She had just finished her shift at the library, her mind still drifting with the scent of old books and the laughter of kids from the weekend drawing class. Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed across her vision, brief but enough to make her slam on the brakes. The tires squealed on the slick road, the truck skidding slightly before coming to a full stop. A few meters ahead, a scene gripped her heart. A man lay motionless beside a toppled motorcycle, its wheels still spinning slowly in the air, like a silent plea for help. His clothes were soaked, blood seeping from his shoulder and chest, mixing with the deep red puddle beneath him. The rain washed the blood across the pavement, tracing jagged streaks like a horrific painting. Lisa turned off the engine, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her breathing rapid. A loud honk blared from behind. A black SUV sped past, splashing water everywhere, its driver not even slowing down. She glanced in the rearview mirror. No one stopped. No one cared. But she couldn't ignore it. She pushed the door open and stepped out, the rain instantly soaking through her thin jacket, cold like needles pricking her skin. The wind howled through the treetops, carrying the scent of wet earth and motor oil from the bike. She ran to him, her soaked canvas shoes splashing in the red puddle. Kneeling beside him, her trembling hands touched his shoulder. "Hang on, I'm here." Her voice faltered in the rain, but she kept talking, as if her words could tether him to this world. Suddenly, his eyes opened. Cloudy, panicked, they stared at her like she was a ghost. He shouted, his voice hoarse, weak yet brimming with despair. "Don't touch me, I'm not worth it." Then, as if his last strength had drained away, his head fell back, and he passed out. But his hand, cold and blood-streaked, clamped tightly around her wrist, as if terrified she'd vanish. In his delirium, he whispered almost inaudibly, "Please, don't leave me." Those words cut through the rain, piercing the shell Lisa had built over years. They stabbed her heart, dragging her back to a memory from 18 years ago. Her mother, Laura, lying in a hospital bed, clutching her hand, whispering her final words before her heartbeat stopped. "Don't leave me, Lisa." Her tears had fallen onto her mother's hand, hot but useless. Now under the freezing rain, that memory surged back, sharp and agonizing. She murmured as if to herself, as if to her mother, "You were right. I can't abandon him." She pulled her phone from her pocket, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Rain seeped into the screen, but she managed to dial 911. "There's an accident on Old Forest Road near mile 17. A man's badly hurt, bleeding a lot. Please come quickly." Her voice broke, merging with the rain. The operator asked something, but she couldn't hear clearly, only shouting, "Hurry!" before hanging up and shoving the phone back into her pocket. She leaned closer, trying to shield him from the rain with her body, though she knew it was futile. Her knees ached from kneeling on the hard pavement, but she didn't care. She looked at him, his pale face, wet black hair plastered to his forehead, lips tinged purple. He looked like a lost soul, abandoned by the world. Suddenly, a truck roared toward them from the opposite direction, its blinding headlights sweeping over them. Lisa flinched, yelling, "Watch out!" She spread her arms to shield him, but the truck veered past, its tires skimming the puddle inches away, splashing water over her. The cold wind sliced through her, but she didn't move. In the distance, an ambulance siren wailed, cutting through the rain. Flashing red and blue lights appeared, and the rescue team leapt out. A man in a reflective jacket shouted, "Ma'am, step aside!" But Lisa didn't budge until they lifted him onto a stretcher. She stood, legs trembling, watching as he was loaded into the ambulance. A rescuer turned to her. "Can you come along?" "He needs someone familiar." Lisa nodded without hesitation. "I'll go." At the hospital, the sharp smell of antiseptic hit her as she sat outside the ER. Her soaked jacket dripped onto the floor, but she didn't notice. A young nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Who are you to him?" Lisa looked up, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "I'll stay until he's okay." The nurse frowned. "He has no ID, no insurance." "Do you know him?" Lisa shook her head, but her mother's letter flashed in her mind, the scrawled words she always carried. "Don't be afraid to save someone, even if they might hurt you." She asked to see his belongings, hoping for a clue. The nurse handed her a small plastic bag, a few coins, a worn lighter, and a soggy scrap of paper with illegible writing. No name, no address. He was a nobody in this world, but as she peered through the ER window, seeing him lying still under the harsh white lights, she felt something fierce. Fate had just knocked. She didn't know who he was or why she was here, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't leave. The sound of rain still echoed in her mind, a reminder this moment would change everything. Chapter 2. Setting and Characters. Lisa Carter sat in the cold waiting room of Portland Hospital, the pale fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on her face. Her khaki jacket, still soaked from the rain, dripped steadily onto the glossy tile floor, forming a small puddle around her worn canvas shoes. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled her nose, mingling with memories of the torrential rain on the forest road just hours earlier, where she had knelt beside a stranger, his blood pooling red beneath him, his hand gripping hers tightly in his delirium. His voice still echoed in her mind. "Please, don't leave me." Those words, faint yet desperate, had pulled her back to the memory of her mother Laura on her deathbed 18 years ago. Lisa, 28 years old, had grown up in a small coastal town in Oregon where Pacific waves crashed against black rocks and endless pine forests stretched into the distance. She worked at the town's public library, an old wooden building with towering bookshelves and the faint smell of paper in the air. The job didn't pay much, but it was enough for her to live simply in the wooden house she'd inherited from her grandmother. A small, cozy place with a creaky porch that groaned whenever the sea breeze blew through. She loved sitting on that porch in the evenings, listening to the waves and painting watercolor landscapes. Sometimes portraits of the kids from the drawing class she volunteered to teach every weekend. Beyond her library work, Lisa spent time caring for the town's elderly, bringing food to bedridden Mrs. Mary, reading to half-blind Mr. John. She didn't do it for money or recognition, but because of a message etched deep in her heart. When she was 10, her mother Laura died of cancer, leaving behind a handwritten note on yellowed paper. "Don't be afraid to save someone, even if they might hurt you." Lisa kept that letter in her wallet, rereading it hundreds of times, though she never fully understood it. Why had her mother written that? Laura had passed young, frail, and weak, but always smiling at her, even in her final days. Lisa lived by her mother's words like a compass, opening her home to anyone in need, from lost travelers to the town's wandering kids. But she didn't know that Laura herself had once been saved by a mysterious woman in Oregon, a benefactor Laura never had the chance to tell her about before she died. The moment on the forest road this afternoon had tested her mother's message in a way she hadn't expected. As she knelt beside the man, rain soaking through her clothes, cold wind cutting her skin, she didn't think about the danger, the truck that nearly knocked her over, or the possibility that he could be trouble. She only heard the voice inside. Mom said, "Don't be afraid." And now, sitting in the hospital, gazing through the ER window where he lay motionless, she wondered, did Mom want me here for him? That man was Mark Walker, though Lisa didn't yet know his name. At 32, he had once been the prince of a wealthy New York real estate family, a world of luxury with skyscrapers, lavish parties, and promises of a dazzling future. His father, Richard Walker, was an ambitious businessman who'd built an empire from nothing. His mother, Margaret, was the family's heart, gentle, kind, always reminding him that money wasn't everything. But when Mark was 25, a financial crisis hit like a storm, sweeping it all away. The company went bankrupt, debts piled up, and the family fell apart. Margaret, her fragile heart unable to bear the strain, died of a heart attack on the sofa in the villa that had once been their pride. Mark was with her then, holding her hand, begging her not to leave, but she only smiled faintly and said, "Forgive your father, Mark. He's only human." He couldn't save her, and that guilt clung to him like a shadow. His father, instead of rebuilding, sank into alcohol and gambling, selling their last home to pay debts before abandoning Mark amid the wreckage of their past. One day Richard disappeared, leaving him with nothing but empty hands and a shattered heart. Since then, Mark had drifted across states, living like a ghost. He took any job, construction, dishwashing, truck driving, but nowhere held him long. He was running, not from the world, but from himself. The battered motorcycle he rode in the rain this afternoon was his last possession, bought with the meager earnings from fixing houses in Idaho a few months back. He didn't know where he was going, only that Oregon was a random stop on his aimless journey. He didn't know that his mother, Margaret, had left a legacy of kindness in this very land, an act of compassion from years ago, when she was young and full of fire, volunteering to help struggling women. Now Mark lay in the ER, still under the white lights, unaware that the woman who'd knelt beside him in the rain was his final link to his mother's past. Lisa sat in the hallway, staring at him through the glass, her hand clutching her wallet where her mother's letter rested. She recalled the moment he'd shouted, "Don't touch me! I'm not worth it." Those words weren't just panic. They were a wound, deep and unhealed, like the pain she'd once seen in her own mother's eyes before she passed. A nurse stepped out, interrupting her thoughts. "He's past the critical stage, but he's still unconscious. Do you want to go in?" Lisa nodded, standing up, her wet shoes squeaking on the floor. She didn't know his name or where he came from, but as she entered the room and saw his pale face under the lights, she felt something certain. He wasn't a stranger. Not entirely. Something in him, in that faint plea amid the rain, made her believe her mother, Laura, had led her here. She sat by his bedside whispering, "Mom said everyone deserves to be saved. I'll stay at least until you open your eyes." Outside, the rain still fell, but in this room, an invisible thread began to form, one neither of them yet recognized, woven from the kindness of two mothers, decades apart. Chapter 3. The First Days Together. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the small hospital room, a monotonous rhythm cutting through the silence. Mark Walker slowly opened his eyes, the pale white light from the ceiling stabbing into his pupils, making him wince. His head throbbed as if someone had hammered his temples, and his body felt heavy, pinned beneath an invisible weight. He tried to piece together what had happened. The pounding rain, the motorcycle wheels slipping on the wet road, the sharp pain as he hit the ground. But his memory stopped there, hazy like fog. Then he heard a gentle voice, faint amid the hum of machines. "I don't know if you like Hemingway, but I thought you'd want to hear something instead of silence." He turned his head slowly and saw her, a young woman sitting by his bed, her warm brown eyes focused on a paperback in her hands. She wore a light blue sweater, her long hair loosely tied back, a few damp strands clinging to her forehead as if she'd just stepped in from the rain. Her hands held The Old Man and the Sea, her voice soft and steady, like she was reading to a child. Mark blinked, stunned. He didn't know who she was, but this sight, a stranger sitting by his side, reading to ease his pain, was something he'd never encountered in all his years of drifting. Lisa Carter looked up when she noticed him stir, setting the book on her lap with a faint smile. "You're awake. I was worried you wouldn't open your eyes." Mark tried to speak, but his throat was parched, producing only a raspy croak. She quickly poured water from a plastic pitcher by the bed and handed him the cup. He took it, hands trembling, sipping slowly as the cool liquid soothed his pain. "Who are you?" he finally managed, his voice weak but laced with suspicion. Lisa tilted her head as if the question didn't matter much. "I'm the one who brought you here. My name's Lisa, and you?" "Mark," he replied curtly, eyes dropping to the white blanket covering him. He didn't know what to say next. In his mind, the rain came rushing back, his own scream, "Don't touch me, I'm not worth it." And a wave of shame washed over him. She'd been there, in the rain when he collapsed, but he couldn't recall it clearly. Why had she stayed? Who was he to her? Lisa seemed to sense his confusion, but she didn't press, saying simply, "The doctor said you've got broken ribs and lost a lot of blood, but you'll be fine. I signed as your medical contact since you didn't have any ID." Mark froze. He rummaged through his memory, wallet, identification, all lost long ago in the months of drifting from state to state. He had nothing to repay her. No insurance, no family. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice lowering, tinged with bitterness. "I'm not worth it." Lisa looked at him, her gaze free of judgment, and replied plainly, "My mom once said everyone deserves to be saved." "I believe her." He didn't respond, but her words made his heart stutter, brushing against an old wound he tried to bury. Over the next few days, Lisa became an indispensable part of that small hospital room. Every morning she arrived after her shift at the library, carrying a plastic container of homemade chicken soup, the aroma of vegetables and herbs wafting out as she lifted the lid. "I'm not a great cook," she said with a laugh, setting it on the table by his bed, "but it'll help you get stronger." Mark ate spoonful by spoonful, slowly, not out of hunger, but because something in the flavor, simple, warm, reminded him of the rare dinners his mother, Margaret, had cooked when he was a boy, before everything fell apart. She didn't just bring food. She told him about the kids in her town's drawing class, Tommy, who drew a whale bigger than the boat, or Lily, who insisted on adding butterflies to every picture. "They keep me laughing all the time," she said, her eyes lighting up. Mark listened, at first in silence, but gradually he felt himself relax. He'd once been used to the coldness of New York's elite, fake handshakes, polite smiles. But with Lisa, there was no pretense. She didn't ask about his past or dig into the scars he kept hidden. She was just there, like a small lamp in the darkness he'd grown too accustomed to. One afternoon, as rare sunlight streamed through the hospital window, Mark spoke up unexpectedly. "I like the smell of pine." Lisa paused her reading, looking up, waiting for more. He hesitated, then added, "When I was a kid, I dreamed of being a carpenter, sawing, planing wood, making something with my hands, but I never dared try." His voice faded, as if afraid of itself. Lisa smiled. "Then it's not too late. When you're better, I've got an old table at home that needs fixing. You could start there." Her words, gentle but sincere, caught Mark off guard. He studied her, searching for a hint of pity, but found none, just a simple trust, as if she truly believed he could do it. For the first time in years, a flicker of light crept into his heart. Not grand hope, but a small, warm feeling that he wasn't entirely useless, as his father had once claimed. Lisa, sitting beside him, sensed the pain in his sparse words. Though he didn't say much, she heard it in his voice, the self-doubt, the brokenness, and it reminded her of her mother, Laura, who'd looked at her with love even as she faded away. In her wallet, her mother's letter rested quietly. "Don't be afraid to save someone, even if they might hurt you." She didn't push Mark to talk about his past, didn't ask why he'd been drifting or why he'd shouted that he wasn't worth it. She believed kindness would heal him, as her mother had taught her, the way she'd knelt by him in the rain despite the danger. On the 5th day, when the doctor said he could be discharged, Lisa brought an old coat of her grandmother's, brown and worn, but warm. "You'll need this if you're going outside," she said, handing it to him. Mark took it, his fingers brushing the fabric, feeling like he was touching something he'd lost long ago. He looked at her, wanting to say something, thanks or sorry, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded, and in his eyes, Lisa saw a faint spark. He was starting to open up. She didn't know that Mark, the man she'd saved in the rain, carried a past tied to her own mother. But in these first days, amid the smell of chicken soup and stories of kids, an invisible bond had formed, a thread that would guide them through old wounds to a place where both could find healing. Chapter 4. Disappearance, then reappearance at her door. That morning, the first sunlight after days of rain streamed through the hospital window, illuminating the white blanket on an empty bed. Lisa Carter stepped into the room, holding a warm container of chicken soup, the scent of herbs wafting from the plastic lid. She'd grown accustomed to coming here each day after her library shift, bringing food, a book, or just a smile to keep company with the man she'd saved in the rain. But today the room was eerily silent. No beeping heart monitor, no faint sound of Mark's breathing. The bed was empty, the blanket neatly folded, as if he'd never been there. On the bedside table, a small scrap of paper lay alone, its scrawled handwriting clear. "Thank you for not leaving me behind. I don't want to be a burden." Lisa set the soup down, her trembling hands picking up the note. She read it over and over, as if the words might change if she stared long enough. But they remained, cold and final. Mark was gone. No goodbye, no promise. Just a brief line left behind after the days she'd sat by him, reading, talking, believing he was starting to open up. She sank into the chair where she'd spent the past 5 days, clutching the note tightly. Memories of him flooded her mind, his raspy voice talking about the smell of pine, the fleeting spark in his eyes when she'd said he could fix her old table. She'd seen him change, if only a little, from the man who'd shouted, "I'm not worth it," in the rain, to one who'd given a faint smile when she handed him her grandmother's old coat. So why had he left? She opened her wallet, pulling out her mother's letter from Laura, the familiar words catching the dim light. "Don't be afraid to save someone, even if they might hurt you." She whispered to herself, "Will he come back?" What did Mom want with him? Lisa asked the nurses, but no one knew where Mark had gone. He checked out early that morning, slipping away like a ghost, leaving nothing but the note. She returned to her wooden house in the coastal town, carrying the uneaten soup and an indescribable emptiness. In the days that followed, she still worked at the library, still taught the kids' drawing class, but her mind wandered. Each time a motorcycle rumbled past the road in front of her house, she'd look up, a flicker of hope igniting, then fading. She wondered if she'd done something wrong. Had she been too close, too trusting, scaring him away? But then she recalled her mother's words, "Even if they might hurt you." Maybe this was what her mom wanted her to learn, patience and faith, even when her kindness seemed unreturned. Meanwhile, Mark Walker walked beneath the pale morning sun after leaving the hospital, the worn brown coat Lisa had given him draped over his shoulders. He had no plan, no destination. His feet carried him out of Portland, along winding back roads past lush pine forests, the scent he'd once mentioned to Lisa now drifting by like a painful reminder. He'd meant to stay, had wanted to believe he could start over, but each night in the hospital after she left and he lay alone, his father's words echoed, "You'll never be good enough, Mark. You're my failure." He didn't want to burden her, the woman who'd saved him in the rain, who'd sat by him with a gentle smile and stories of kids. She didn't know who he was, didn't know he'd once had everything and lost it all, didn't know he carried the guilt of failing to save his mother, Margaret, and the sting of his father's betrayal. He had nothing to offer her, no money, no home, not even a name worth remembering. He'd written the note in the dead of night, his hands shaking as he put pen to paper, then left before dawn, hoping she'd forget him as the world had. 2 weeks passed, and Mark drifted through small towns along Oregon's coast. He slept in abandoned sheds, ate dry bread, bought with the last of his coins, and took odd jobs, cleaning trash, fixing fences, to scrape by. But each night, lying on the cold ground, he thought of Lisa's chicken soup, her voice reading Hemingway. The look in her eyes when she'd said, "It's not too late." He remembered how she'd made him feel, if only for a moment, like he wasn't worthless. Then one morning, standing before a pine forest as the wind carried that familiar woody scent, he realized running didn't erase the pain. It only cost him the one thing that still mattered, her. He turned back, his steps heavy but resolute. The motorcycle was wrecked in the crash, so he walked, hitched rides, and finally stood before Lisa's wooden house one late afternoon, 2 weeks after he'd left. The house nestled by the coastal road, its creaky porch groaning, smoke curling from the chimney. He wore a threadbare shirt, clutching a small canvas bag with a few tattered clothes, all he owned. He knocked, heart pounding, unsure how she'd react. Lisa opened the door, her eyes widening when she saw him. She'd just finished watering plants, her hands still smudged with dirt, the faint scent of lavender lingering. Mark stood there, hesitant, his voice rough. I've got nothing, no home, no money, no future. But if you'll let me, I want to learn to start over. Here, with you. He lowered his head, bracing for rejection, fearing he wasn't worthy. But Lisa smiled, the same gentle smile he'd seen in the hospital, and said, My mom told me not to fear saving someone. You being here is enough. She stepped aside, inviting him in. Mark crossed the threshold, the smell of old wood mingling with the aroma of soup simmering on the stove. He set his bag down, watching as she set the table. A bowl, a spoon, as if she'd been waiting for him. Lisa took her mother's letter from her wallet, placing it on the table without a word, though a question still echoed in her mind. What did Mom want with him? She didn't know the answer lay in Mark, in his past, and in a photograph he'd bring later. But for now, as he sat and took the spoon she offered, Mark felt something he'd long forgotten, the sensation of being welcomed. He looked at her, his gaze no longer evasive, and thought silently, maybe I don't need to run anymore. Lisa looked back, believing her kindness, as her mother had taught, had brought him back. 2 weeks apart hadn't broken the bond between them. It had only made it stronger. Chapter 5. Living Together, Healing Together. Lisa Carter's small wooden house nestled along Oregon's coastal road, where the sound of waves crashing against rocks mingled with the wind, rustling through lush pine groves. The night Mark returned, knocking on her door with a threadbare shirt and a tattered bag, she'd opened it without hesitation, welcoming him like an old friend. She set a bowl of hot chicken soup before him, and from that day, he stayed. Not in the warm main house with her, but in a small outbuilding behind it, an old shed where her grandmother once stored gardening tools. Lisa spent an afternoon cleaning it out, sweeping away dust, setting up a foldable bed, and draping it with a thick wool blanket from her old stash. It's not fancy, she said, handing him the key, but I hope you'll feel okay here. Mark looked around the room, his eyes flickering with quiet surprise at the simple thoughtfulness, then nodded. Thank you. In those early days, Mark was quiet, like a passer-by. He woke early when the dawn was still faint and began tending to the backyard garden. It had once been her grandmother's pride, with fragrant purple lavender beds, but now weeds overran it, choking the paths. Mark didn't say much, just grabbed a hoe and bucket, pulling weeds, trimming, and digging with an odd focus. Lisa often stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching him. She noticed how he picked out every small stone mixed in the soil, how he gently propped up a sapling bent by the wind. Slow movements, as if he were rediscovering a piece of himself with each stroke of the hoe. One morning, with the air still damp from a night rain, Lisa stepped into the garden with a pair of old gloves. Let me help, she said, kneeling by a flower bed without waiting for his approval. Mark hesitated briefly, then handed her the bucket. Watch out for thorns. They worked together, silent but not awkward, exchanging only brief words. Is this plant still alive? Yes, the roots are still strong. By noon, the garden took shape. Weeds cleared, a small patch replanted with lettuce Lisa liked. She wiped sweat from her brow, looked at him, and smiled. You're better at gardening than I am. Mark shrugged, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward, a small smile she recognized as a sign he was easing up. Beyond the garden, Mark fixed the porch roof. The old wooden house creaked whenever the sea breeze blew, and a few spots leaked from the heavy rain the day he'd collapsed on the road. Lisa brought out an old toolbox, hammer, nails, spare planks, and Mark got to work. He climbed the ladder, drove nails, replaced rotted wood, sweat rolling down his forehead despite the cool air. Lisa stood below, passing tools when he needed them, sometimes teasing, Don't fall, I don't want to call 911 again. He didn't reply, but his eyes flickered with a hint of lightness, as if her words loosened his tension. When the roof was done, sturdy and leak-free, he stood back, hands on hips. I used to dream of doing stuff like this. Lisa nodded. Pine wood, right? He looked at her, surprised she remembered, then gave a slight nod. On weekends, Lisa convinced him to join her teaching art at the town's community center. The small class buzzed with kids aged 6 to 12, each with their own quirks. Mark resisted at first. "I don't know how to draw," but Lisa dragged him along, handing him a pencil and paper. "Just try. No one's going to judge you." He sat beside Tommy, the boy who loved drawing whales, and quietly sketched. His drawing was clumsy, a crooked tree, a few jagged lines, but Tommy laughed. "It looks like the tree outside my house." Mark flushed briefly, then laughed too, the first time Lisa saw him truly at ease. She watched from across the room, hands smudged with watercolor from Lily's painting, and thought, "He fits with the kids more than he knows." Lisa didn't just let him work alone. She wanted him to relearn the small things in life he seemed to have forgotten. One evening, she pulled him into the kitchen, setting a pan and some potatoes in front of him. "Learn to cook. You can't rely on my soup forever." Mark fumbled as he cut the potatoes, dropping a few pieces on the floor. But she didn't laugh, just picked them up and showed him how to hold the knife. They made mashed potatoes, slightly burnt at the bottom, but when they ate, he said, "Better than I expected." She grinned. "Next time will be even better." She also helped him write a resume. They sat at the kitchen table under the glow of a yellow lamp, papers and pens scattered around. Mark reluctantly listed the odd jobs he'd done, construction, dishwashing, but Lisa patiently wrote them down, adding the new skills he'd picked up, repairs, gardening. "This is a fresh start," she said, handing him the finished sheet. He stared at it, gripping the pen tightly, and nodded, though his eyes held a trace of doubt. More importantly, she taught him to face failure. One day, while trying to fix an old wooden chair in the living room, the one she'd mentioned in the hospital, it broke another leg when he hammered too hard. Mark threw the hammer down, voice tight. "I can't do anything right." Lisa picked it up, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Try again. It's okay if it breaks, just keep going." He reluctantly followed, and this time, with her help, the chair stood firm. When it was done, he sat on it, testing its strength, then smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "First time I feel like I matter." Lisa looked at him, her gaze soft. "You mattered the moment you chose to stay." Those moments slowly changed Mark. He'd lived in darkness, guilt over failing to save his mother, Margaret, his father's words branding him a failure. But here, in this wooden house, each weed he pulled, each roof he fixed, each laugh with the kids mended a piece of his wounds. He didn't say it, but Lisa saw it, in how he started eating more, sleeping deeper, sometimes meeting her eyes without looking away. She didn't know where he came from or his past, but she felt him as someone needing to be pulled from an abyss, someone she couldn't turn her back on. Lisa changed too, though she didn't notice at first. Each night after he returned to the outbuilding and she sat alone, she thought of her mother, Laura, and the letter she'd left. A vague feeling grew. He was part of something bigger, a piece she didn't yet understand. Her kindness, learned from her mother, was doing what she'd always believed, bringing light to the darkest places. One night, they sat on the porch, watching the moonlit waves shimmer. Mark spoke suddenly. "Thank you for giving me a place to stay." Lisa turned, slightly surprised, then smiled. "I just did what felt right." "You deserve it." He nodded, gazing at the sea, a quiet resolve forming within him. He wouldn't run anymore. Lisa looked at him, believing her kindness was pulling him from the shadows, and that their journey was only beginning. Chapter 6. Love blossoms, yet the past remains a barrier. Spring arrived in the coastal Oregon town, bringing gentle breezes and longer days. Lisa Carter's wooden house was no longer just a shelter. It had become a small haven for both her and Mark Walker. After months of living together, tending the garden, fixing the porch, teaching art to the kids, something had quietly grown between them. It wasn't loud or declared, but natural, like the lavender blooming again in the garden they cared for together. Their love didn't begin with grand confessions, but through small, everyday moments, woven into their routine like brushstrokes on a watercolor painting. One weekend afternoon at the town's community center art class, Lisa was busy helping little Lily mix colors to add another butterfly to her drawing. Mark sat in the corner, as usual, quietly watching the kids with a pencil in hand. Today, instead of sketching the clumsy, broken tree lines like before, he picked up a sheet of paper and began to draw. Lisa didn't notice until Tommy ran over, tugging her arm and shouting, "Lisa, look what Mark drew!" She walked over, peered over his shoulder, and burst into laughter. On the paper was a portrait of her, but not the version she saw in the mirror each morning. Her long hair was a wild, fluffy mess, her eyes exaggerated into huge orbs, and her face looked more like a bear than a person. Mark looked up, a touch embarrassed as she laughed. "I told you I can't draw." But Lisa couldn't stop, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes from laughing so hard. "If I were really a bear, I'd hug you so tight you'd suffocate." She snatched the paper from his hands, holding it up for the class to see, and the kids erupted in giggles. Tommy yelled, "Mark turned Lisa into a sea bear." Mark flushed, trying to stay serious, but then the corner of his mouth twitched, and he laughed too. A free, unguarded laugh, the first time Lisa saw him truly let go of his shell. She kept the drawing, folding it and tucking it into her pocket, thinking it was more precious than any masterpiece in the library where she worked. Moments like these grew more frequent. One evening, as they washed dishes after dinner, a batch of mashed potatoes Mark had learned to make without burning the pan, he accidentally splashed water on her shirt. Lisa pretended to be mad, wiping his face with a towel, and they stood there laughing like kids. Another time, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, she rested her head on his shoulder without thinking, and he didn't pull away. Just let her stay, his breathing syncing with the rhythm of the waves. Their love didn't need grand words. It grew through accidental touches, shared glances, and the ease of being together without explanation. But the deepest moment came on a moonless night, with rain tapping lightly against the windows. They sat in the living room, the soft glow of a table lamp casting light on their faces. Lisa was sketching a small picture, the hill where she'd saved Mark in the rain, while he sat across from her, holding a mug of coffee she'd made. Silence enveloped them, broken only by the patter of rain and the scratch of her pencil on paper. Then Mark spoke suddenly, his voice low and hesitant. "My dad said I was never good enough." Lisa stopped drawing, looking up, waiting for more. He stared into his mug, fingers tightening around the handle. "He said I was why everything fell apart, the company, the family, that I didn't deserve anything. You make me want to believe I could be different." His confession was like a door cracking open, revealing a glimpse of the darkness he carried. Lisa set her pencil down, reaching across the table to take his hand. His was cold, but she held it firmly, her voice gentle. "I don't care who you used to be or what your dad said. To me, you're enough, just as you are, from the moment you stayed." Mark looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and in that instant, she saw a spark. Not doubt, but hope. He didn't reply, just squeezed her hand lightly, and they sat there, hands clasped, letting the rain speak the words they didn't need to say. Their love grew like that, unrushed, quiet, but deep and real. Lisa loved him not for who he'd been, but for the man rising from ruin, the one who drew her as a clumsy bear, who made her laugh and brought color to her life. Mark loved her for her non-judgmental kindness, for making him feel he wasn't a failure, for being the light in his darkest days. Yet even as their feelings became undeniable, Mark's past loomed as an invisible barrier, silently standing between them. At times, Mark would fall suddenly quiet, his gaze distant, lost in a place Lisa couldn't reach. One morning, while they worked in the garden, he stopped mid-task, hoe in hand, staring at the pine forest in the distance without a word. Lisa asked, "You okay?" He nodded, but the forced smile didn't hide the sadness in his eyes. Another night, as she talked about the art class, he listened, but his hand unconsciously gripped the table's edge, as if anchoring himself against drifting into memory. She could feel it. He was hiding something, a wound deeper than what he'd shared, a ghost from his past he wasn't ready to face. Lisa didn't push him. She remembered her mother Laura's letter and the lesson about kindness, about giving people time to heal. She didn't probe into his silences or dig for more about his father or his years of wandering. But sometimes when he turned away, she wondered, what hurts him so much? She wanted him to know she was there, not just to save him in the rain, but to walk with him through whatever storm raged inside. Mark felt his own barrier too. He loved Lisa. He knew it, though he hadn't dared say it. But each time he wanted to step closer, to hold her tight or say words he'd never said to anyone, his father's voice echoed, "You don't deserve it." He feared hurting her, feared his past, the bankruptcy, his mother's death, his father's abandonment, would drag her down with him. He wanted to believe her, that he was enough, but the old scars still smoldered, holding him back. One evening as they stood on the porch watching rain glisten under the streetlights, Lisa suddenly took his hand, saying nothing, just standing there. Mark looked at her, his heart racing, and in that moment, he wanted to tell her everything, about his mother, Margaret, about all he'd lost. But he stopped, staying silent, and only gripped her hand tighter. Lisa sensed the struggle within him, but didn't press. She believed their love, though fragile, was strong enough to overcome that barrier. If only he'd let himself step through. Chapter 7. He begins to build a life. Summer arrived in the coastal Oregon town, bringing warm sunlight and salty breezes from the Pacific. Lisa Carter's wooden house was no longer just a dwelling. It had become a true anchor for Mark Walker. After months of living together, tending the garden, fixing the porch, teaching art with the kids, Mark was no longer the silent, aimless drifter Lisa had saved in the rain. He'd changed slowly but surely, and in his eyes, Lisa saw a new spark, a desire to do something, not just for himself, but for those around him. One morning, as they sat at the kitchen table eating breakfast, toast and black coffee, Mark set his mug down, his voice hesitant. "I think I should find a job." Lisa paused mid-bite, looking up at him, her brown eyes lighting up with surprise and delight. "That's a great idea," she said. "Do you have anything in mind?" He shrugged, fingers tracing the table's edge. "I used to work in real estate with my dad. Not building from scratch, but I know how to repair, measure things. Maybe I could try something related." Lisa smiled, sliding the resume they'd written together across the table. "Then start with this." Mark took the paper, scanning the lines she'd penned. Small skills he'd picked up from his wandering days and the months here. Repairs, gardening, patience. He wasn't sure what he could do with it, but the way Lisa looked at him, full of trust, made him want to try. The next day, he put on the cleanest shirt from his bag, borrowed Lisa's bike, and pedaled to a small construction company on the town's outskirts. It was an old lumber workshop, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and paint, where workers hammered house frames and sawed planks. The manager, an older man named Hank with a silver beard and sharp eyes, glanced at Mark's resume, frowning. "Not much experience, huh? What can you do?" Mark stood tall, his voice steadier than he expected. "I can fix houses, measure accurately, and work hard. Give me a chance, and I'll prove it." Hank shrugged, handing him a hammer. "Try building this frame." Mark took it, his hand trembling slightly, but he recalled the days fixing Lisa's porch, how he'd driven nails, measured wood. He finished in half an hour, not perfect but solid. Hank nodded. "All right. Start Monday. Pays low, but if you improve, I'll raise it." Mark rode home, shirt soaked with sweat, but the grin on his face said it all. Lisa was watering the garden, looking up as she heard the bike. "How'd it go?" He dismounted, nodding. "I got the job." She dropped the watering can, ran over and hugged him, heedless of the dirt on her shirt. "I knew you could do it." He stood still, a bit awkward, but then wrapped his arms around her, a warmth spreading through him. The construction job wasn't easy. Mark started at the bottom, hauling lumber, nailing boards, assisting the main crew. But he drew on old experience from working with his father, calculating materials, reading blueprints, and quickly proved his worth. After a few weeks, Hank gave him bigger tasks, repairing roofs, framing walls. He worked diligently, sometimes staying late at the shop, learning from the other workers. By the third month, Hank called him into the office. "You're doing well. From now on, you'll lead a small team. Pays up a bit." Mark nodded, saying little, but inside a flicker of pride stirred, the first time he didn't feel like the failure his father had labeled him. On his first payday, Mark didn't keep the money for himself. He biked into town, stopping at the little art supply store Lisa frequented. He picked out a jar of sea blue paint, her favorite color, the shade of the ocean they watched at sunset. When he got home, he handed it to her, sheepish. This, it's for you. Lisa's eyes widened, cradling the jar like a treasure. Mark, you didn't have to do this. He shrugged. I wanted to. That night she sat at the kitchen table, mixing the paint he'd given her, and created a piece. The hill where she'd saved him in the rain, with a blue sky and sprawling pines. When it was done, she hung it in the living room above the fireplace, saying, "So you'll remember how far you've come every day." He looked at it, silent, but his eyes shone with unspoken gratitude. The steady job ignited a bigger dream in Mark. He noticed the old houses around town, leaky roofs, cracked walls, belonging to families too poor to fix them. He remembered his days of drifting, sleeping in abandoned sheds, and thought, what if I could repair homes for them? He shared the idea with Lisa one evening on the porch. I want to start a small company, fixing houses for low-income people. Not for big money, but to help someone. Lisa tilted her head, smiling. That sounds like you. I'll help. They started with the basics. Lisa designed a logo for the company, a simple wooden house with a pine tree beside it, her strokes soft yet bold. She borrowed a library computer, taught herself to build a website, and posted about affordable repair services. Mark used his saved wages to buy basic tools, a saw, hammer, drill, and took on small jobs, fixing Mrs. Mary's roof, patching Mr. John's wall. Lisa went with him, introducing him to people she knew, and word spread. Mark's little company, named Pinewood Fixes, after the pine scent he loved, grew from a handful of clients to steady contracts around town. But Mark didn't stop there. He dreamed of a charity fund where he could help people like he'd once been, homeless, by fixing homes for free and teaching them skills to earn a living. He told Lisa one night as they reviewed the company website, I want to do something like you. Help people, not just for money. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You already are. This is just the beginning. Mark looked at her, feeling like everything he'd lost, faith, purpose, was slowly returning, thanks to her and his own efforts. Chapter 8, Disappearing Again, and the Gift of Spring. The following spring, Pinewood Fixes, Mark Walker's small company, had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. From sporadic repair jobs in town, it landed a major contract with a national charity, renovating a row of homes for low-income families in Portland. The money was enough to hire more workers, buy new equipment, and start the charity fund he'd dreamed of, a place to help people like he'd once been, homeless and adrift. One afternoon, he stood in the workshop, watching the crew frame houses, a mix of pride and anxiety swelling within him. He'd come a long way from collapsing on that forest road, but this success brought pressure. He feared failing, just as his father had with the real estate empire in New York. When he returned to Lisa's wooden house, the sunset glowing red over the sea, she was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea. She handed him a letter, its envelope crumpled, the handwriting shaky. Mark, I'm dying. See you one last time. Dad. Mark took it, his hand freezing midair, his eyes darkening. His father, Richard Walker, the man who'd abandoned him after the family's bankruptcy, who'd called him a failure not worth keeping, now wanted to see him. His heart tore in two. Memories of his mother, Margaret, flooded back. Her lying in bed, voice faint. Forgive your father, Mark. He's only human. He didn't want to go, didn't want to face the man who'd destroyed everything he'd once had, but his mother's plea tugged at him like an invisible thread. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, watching the waves glimmer under the streetlights, the letter crumpled in his hand. He wanted to tell Lisa, to share this burden, but he held back. He feared she'd worry, feared her gentle gaze would dim for him, feared she'd lose sleep over the nights he'd be gone. He couldn't let her carry more pain, not after all she'd done for him. Before dawn, he rose quietly, leaving the worn brown coat she'd given him in the hospital draped over the chair, a silent promise he'd return. He stepped out, his silhouette fading into the morning mist, leaving Lisa with an emptiness she didn't yet understand. Lisa woke as the first sunlight streamed through the window. She walked into the living room, saw the coat lying alone on the chair, and her heart tightened. No note, no sign beyond the coat. But she didn't panic like the first time he'd left. She touched the frayed fabric, recalling the day she'd given it to him in the hospital, and trusted he'd come back. She didn't know where he'd gone, but she felt it. He had a reason, and she'd wait, as she always had. Mark reached New York after a long bus ride, his weary legs leading him to a rundown slum. His father's apartment was a tiny room, its walls stained, the air thick with mildew. Richard lay on the bed, skeletal and frail, his cloudy eyes fixed on him. "You came." Mark stood in the doorway, fists clenched, silent. His father wheezed, trembling as he pulled an old photo from under the pillow. Margaret, his mother, standing beside a young pregnant woman holding a newborn. He spoke, voice weak but clear. "This is your mom and Laura, a woman she helped in Oregon. Back then, your mom and I went there for charity work. Laura's husband had left her, homeless, penniless, pregnant. Your mom gave her a place to stay, took her to the hospital when she gave birth. She was the kindest woman I ever knew, always helping, always smiling, even though I didn't deserve her." He paused, tears rolling down his wrinkled face. "I couldn't protect her. When the company went under, I abandoned her, abandoned you. I was wrong, Mark. Forgive me." Mark flinched, staring at the photo, recognizing the young woman as Laura, Lisa's mother. The tiny, fragile baby in Laura's arms could only be Lisa. He trembled, asking, "Who's the baby?" But Richard couldn't answer. His breath hitched, his hand fell limp, and he passed away before Mark's eyes. In the cold room, Mark held the photo, overwhelmed by a storm of emotions: pain, shock, and sudden clarity. His father left a small sum, the last of an inheritance, and the photo, a belated atonement. 2 weeks later, Mark returned to Oregon, carrying the photo and a new resolve. With his father's money, he bought a plot near the hill where Lisa had saved him, hiring workers to build a small, white wooden house with a lavender fence. A gift for her. One spring afternoon, he led Lisa there, his hands shaking as he handed her the photo. "This is my mom, Margaret, and your mom, Laura, when you were born. My mom saved yours, and now you saved me. I built this house for you. You're my home." Lisa stared at the photo, tears spilling as she recognized her mother in Margaret's embrace. She hugged him, voice choked. "This is fate, Mark. My mom was saved by yours, and now we're together." Mark knelt, pulling a simple silver ring from his pocket. "Will you let me build a life with you?" She nodded, tears streaming, and they stood there, amidst the wooden house, where two mothers had unknowingly linked them across decades. Chapter 9. A happy ending. Together for the community. The following autumn, the backyard of Lisa Carter and Mark Walker's small white wooden house was bathed in soft golden sunlight, with dry pine needles scattered across the green lawn. This house, Mark's gift to Lisa, built with his father's inheritance, was now more than just their home. It symbolized the journey they traveled together. Today it became the heart of a special occasion, their wedding day. There was no grand cathedral, no lavish guests in expensive attire, just a simple, warm ceremony held in the garden they'd once cleared together, where the lavender fence bloomed vibrantly and the distant sound of ocean waves provided a natural soundtrack. Lisa stood in the yard wearing a plain white dress she'd sewn herself, knee-length with delicate floral trim. Her hair was loosely tied, a few strands dancing in the breeze, and her brown eyes sparkled as she looked at Mark. He wore a white shirt and jeans, the simplest outfit he owned, but his gaze shone, free of the shadows from his wandering days. They hadn't hired an organizer, a band, or bridesmaids and groomsmen. Instead, their guests were familiar faces from town, the kids from the art class, the elderly folks Lisa had cared for, and even homeless people Mark had helped through Pinewood Fixes. Tommy, now a bit taller, stood beside Mark as the self-appointed ring bearer, clutching the simple silver ring Mark had used to propose. Lily, her hair tied with a red bow, darted around the yard, scattering lavender petals she'd picked from the fence. Mrs. Mary, whose leaky house Mark had fixed for free, sat in a folding chair, smiling kindly. Mr. John, his eyes dim but ears sharp, clapped as the local pastor, a friend of Lisa's, read the vows. Among the small crowd, a few bearded men in worn clothes, former street dwellers like Mark, stood quietly, their eyes grateful as they watched him. The ceremony was brief. Mark held Lisa's hands, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke his vows. I used to think I didn't deserve anything, but you gave me a home, a reason to live, and I promise to spend my life by your side, making you happy. Lisa smiled, tears glistening. You're my home, Mark. I promise to walk with you, no matter what lies ahead. They exchanged rings, and when the pastor declared them husband and wife, the kids cheered, Mrs. Mary wiped her eyes, and applause rang out across the little yard. Mark leaned down to kiss her, a gentle but full kiss, and for the first time, he felt he truly belonged somewhere. After the ceremony, everyone gathered in the yard. Lisa and Mark had prepared the feast themselves, sandwiches, mashed potatoes Mark had mastered, and a small cake gifted by a neighbor. The kids ran around playing tag while the adults sat on folding chairs or the grass, chatting lively. Tommy dragged Mark to a corner, showing off a new drawing, a whale in a wedding hat, and Mark laughed heartily, ruffling the boy's hair. Lisa sat with Mr. John, reading him a poem she'd written for the day, her voice as soft as when she'd read Hemingway to Mark in the hospital. The wedding wasn't just their day. It was a day for this small community, people once abandoned or hopeless, now connected through Lisa and Mark's kindness. As the sun set, they lit paper lanterns together, hanging them around the yard, their golden glow illuminating joyful faces. A man who'd once been homeless, now a helper at Pinewood Fixes, stood and said, "Thank you, Mark, for giving me a job, and thank you, Lisa, for giving us hope." The crowd clapped, and Mark squeezed Lisa's hand tighter, feeling his past pain heal through moments like these. After the wedding, their lives didn't just revolve around each other, they expanded to embrace the community. Every weekend, they led charity trips with Pinewood Fixes. Mark and his crew repaired homes for the poor for free, patching roofs, building walls, replacing windows, while Lisa brought books, clothes, and food to those in need. The art class kids sometimes tagged along, painting walls or creating small drawings to decorate the new homes. Mark's charity fund, named Margaret's Hope in honor of his mother, took off, teaching construction skills to the homeless, helping them find jobs and rise up as he had. Lisa supported him tirelessly. She managed the fund's finances, wrote grant letters, and designed simple flyers to spread the word. Once, while fixing a home for a single mother, she sat with the woman's young child, teaching it to draw butterflies as she'd done with Lily. Mark watched from afar, hands streaked with paint, thinking, "She's why all this is possible." They didn't earn much from these efforts, but every repaired home, every smile they sparked, was a reward greater than any contract. One autumn afternoon, after a long day of charity work, Lisa and Mark sat on a wooden bench in their yard, watching the sun sink red over the sea. A breeze rustled the lavender fence, carrying its gentle scent, their shared creation. Lisa leaned her head on his shoulder, holding the old photo, Mark's father's legacy, showing Margaret and Laura with baby Lisa. Mark gazed at it, his voice low. 28 years ago, my mom stood in Oregon, saving yours. Who'd have thought we'd end up here together? Lisa nodded, eyes shining. It's fate, Mark. My mom was saved by yours, and now we're carrying it on. Not just for us, but for everyone out there. He turned to her, his gaze tender. My mom would be proud. She always wanted to help people, and you remind me of her, how you never give up on anyone, even me. Lisa smiled, taking his hand. My mom, too. She taught me kindness always finds its way back, and it brought you to me. They sat in silence, letting the waves speak their thoughts. Mark reflected on his journey, from a homeless drifter with no hope to a husband and community builder. He thought of his mother, Margaret, the kind woman who'd saved Laura, and felt she was smiling somewhere. Pleased her kindness lived on through him and Lisa. Lisa thought of her mother, Laura, and the letter she'd left. No longer a question, but a certainty that everything happened for a reason. As the sun vanished, leaving a star-filled sky, Mark pulled Lisa close, whispering, "Thank you for saving me, not just once." She nestled into his chest, replying, "Thank you for staying." In the yard, the lanterns still glowed, their golden light bathing the wooden house where two mothers had linked them 28 years ago. A home where they now build a life, not just for themselves, but for the community they loved and served. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone.